Our liberties we prize, and our rights we will maintain. This is Iowa Civil Rights History Podcast, where we tell stories about the contribution Iowans and the state of Iowa has made to advance the civil rights movement. Past stories are being told, present actions will be highlighted, and preparation for the future will be discussed. Here is your host, Eric Anyange.
Welcome to the Iowa Civil Rights History Podcast. In 1837, a Quaker man by the name Henderson Lewelling moved to Salem, Iowa. After he arrived in Salem, he built a house which is located about 20 miles away from the Missouri border. That house he built became one of the most important places for runaway slaves who were coming from the state of Missouri. I traveled to Salem, Iowa today to visit this historic house, which is now called the Lewelling Quaker Museum, and to learn a little bit about Mr. Henderson Lewelling. I have two special guests on the show today, Dave and Cathy Helman. Dave is the board president of the Lewelling Quaker Museum, and his wife, Cathy, she's the treasurer of the Lewelling Quaker Museum. Also, Cathy's great-great-grandfather was a friend of Mr. Henderson Lewelling. It is my great pleasure to have both of them on the show today to discuss the history and the life of Henderson Lewelling. Back to our conversation on Henderson Lewelling. Now, his wife, Elizabeth, she's kind of silent voice, and I'm sure she was a force behind it too.
She was a force. I do stress this to tour groups who come in, especially if there are young girls in the group and women, that the whole system, the Underground Railroad, would not have been successful if it weren't for the women. They were in charge of the kitchen, and that's where the hiding places usually were. They were also managing their children and so many other things. We know that the women of the town would get word ahead of time if there were freedom seekers on the way. So they would start preparing food, pots of cornmeal mush, pots of beans. Elizabeth made great pancakes, so she'd have a lot of pancake batter ready. And we also have stories of Quaker ladies oiling their sewing machines, getting ready to do a lot of sewing.
For clothing? For
clothing,
okay.
Yes. Especially for children who are not well clothed enough for the journey. And so we have stories of Quaker women staying up all night sewing clothing. But going back to Elizabeth, as soon as word would come that there were bounty hunters or slave catchers on the way, and they were being so close to Missouri, she knew to get the freedom seekers, the slaves, under the kitchen floor and absolutely hidden. Well, they'd close the hatch, put a rug and a table, and she would have friends or her children sitting around that table, shelling peas, peeling apples, acting like
nothing going on
here.
Yeah.
So if there was a knock at the door, she would likely say, well, thee may come in, but thee will not find any runaways here. True to her faith, she was not telling a lie. She didn't say they weren't here. She just said you won't find them here.
Just be clever with it.
Yes. But you think about the bravery, the risk, the management of all of it. Women were very involved.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth was, of course.
Yeah, because, I was always thinking about that. In the beginning, I was like, oh, maybe they did not know. And then I was like, hold on a second.
Oh, they knew.
Their runaway slaves has to be fed.
Yes.
And women control that kitchen. So if Lewelling would be like, oh, we need more food than that, then she would turn around for who? So she had to be part of that plan.
To know.
Yeah, that what is going on or how many we got coming.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She would be very much in on the details of it. And the older children, and perhaps even younger children also, very well disciplined, knowing that everything that was going on here was a secret, and they were not to say a word to anyone.
But I can imagine maybe most people in the town, they kind of knew what was going on.
Oh, for sure. And oftentimes visitors get confused because we happen to be here. We're left standing with this beautiful home and this concealment place beneath the kitchen floor. Well, it wasn't the only place. There were barns and haymows. The prairie grass grew 6 foot tall, so you could hide in the grass and by the orchards. The number of places the slave owner or the bounty hunter had to look was immense. So it's not like he was only coming directly to 401 South Main Street and looking for slaves. He had 100 places to look, and towns. The idea was to, as Cathy said, greet him, let him look around, and get him out of here as fast as possible.
What's this room here? Is this original room?
Yes, it's an original room. It likely was a small bedroom.
Okay.
It deteriorated over the years, and about 25 years ago, Cathy and I were not here at the time, but the floor had to be replaced, and the original hand-hewn floor joists are removed. We have those attached to the ceiling so people could see how logs were hand-hewn. And another hiding place was discovered. We're pretty sure, we're not absolute, but we're pretty sure it was also used as a place to conceal one or two people when necessary, when bounty hunters were in the neighborhood.
Okay. They moved out of here in,
1847. So they were here about 10 years. That was when Henderson had been planning this. He was reading up about the West, hearing about the wonderful land and the better climate. Made the decision to go west to Oregon. He heard about the Oregon Trail. He spent a good deal of time preparing a wagon to move his nursery west on the Oregon Trail.
Oh, he moved his old business.
Yes, he did.
Oh.
He had grafted 700 fruit stock, as they called it, fruit trees and bushes, and laid a bed of charcoal and soil in this huge wagon. It took 6 oxen to pull it. Then left, I believe, in the spring of 1847 with the 8 children, Elizabeth, who was pregnant at the time, and headed out. Wow. So
Elizabeth would later say that she walked all the way to Oregon because it's easier to walk when you're pregnant than it is to ride a horse.
Wow. Did he have the same maybe impact in Oregon as he did in Iowa?
Yes.
He did?
He's known today as the father of the West Coast fruit industry. And if you visit the Willamette Valley south of Portland, you'll see his name everywhere on parks and schools. And his family prospered in the orchard business. His timing was good because they're producing fresh fruit by 1852, 1853. And the California gold rush had happened a few years earlier. So there's some folk with some money, and he has the only fresh fruit in the West Coast. And anything at that time had to go all the way by sailing vessel all around South America or through the Isthmus of Panama. So he did quite well.
Okay. Out of his 10 children, Mr. Lewelling and Elizabeth, what do we know about them?
The oldest son was Alfred. Alfred would travel west with him, and he would be a prominent worker and organizer of the orchards, would have his own family. We know that they all made the trip. The Oregon trip was tough. Several in the party died, mostly from cholera or dysentery. Many died en route for a variety of reasons, but drinking bad water was the number one reason. People didn't know enough about the bacteria and not drink water down where 50 oxen are standing and that sort of thing. But Lewelling seemed to know that. It might have been the heritage from his father, and he was a wise man. But none of the Lewelling children died or suffered going west, whereas I think 6 in that wagon train party did die. They had come from Salem, the Hocketts and the Fishers. They arrive in Oregon in November and have no place to live yet, and Elizabeth gives birth to a boy on the banks of the Columbia River, literally on the banks of the Columbia River, and they named the young lad Oregon Columbia Lewelling.
Oh, wow.
He went his whole life by OC, and we have a large picture of him and his wife here at the home, and he helped also establish the orchards and in California. Yeah. They left here 23 Salem residents in, I believe, 8 wagons with cattle and horses and oxen. They went to St. Joseph, Missouri, which was sort of the jumping off point for the way west. They joined a large wagon train there, about 100 wagons. They get near North Platte, Nebraska, and some folks in the larger wagon train are annoyed because the Lewellings with their big tree wagon is slowing them down.
How many trees did they carry?
He had 700 small plantings in the wagon that Cathy described. So they broke off into their own group and made their way west. At one point they joined another train briefly, but they largely went on their own through west into Idaho, into Oregon. They had to build rafts for themselves and their equipment, their supplies on the Columbia River. But they were successful, and at least all the Lewellings made it.
Now, why did he want to transport 700 trees? They could not find the trees in Oregon?
They hadn't been there. He and his family knew that wherever they went, they had to create new orchards. I don't know whether he had heard what was there, but the apple trees, particularly these fruit trees, had to be grown from stock. They had to stock, and he wanted to be ready to plant them when he got there. I don't think he could get to Oregon and start looking around to find trees to plant. So that was his strategy. I don't know exactly what he was thinking.
Where did he go from there? Because he did not come back to Iowa after that.
No. It's rather interesting. In 1847, of course, he left here, and young Nelson Gibbs moved in, the young attorney who would be involved in the later important Daggs slave case. And he did not sell the house. One would think that if you're going to head to Oregon and not come back, why not sell the house? He actually leased it for 5 or 6 years. We've had some writing from one of Henderson and Elizabeth's great-great-grandchildren, Walter Lewelling, who lives in Oregon. And he theorizes that Elizabeth, again, a pretty strong-willed woman, wasn't too excited about this Oregon trip. She was quite happy here. The town was prospering. She had a lovely home. She'd packed up and moved from Indiana. She'd packed up and moved from North Carolina. Moving was not easy in those days. And Walter Lewelling, the great-great-grandson, says she may have said, Henderson, let's hang on to that house just in case this Oregon thing doesn't work out. We don't know that for a fact. And Walter doesn't know that for a fact. But it is interesting. And the tragedy is that 1 year after arriving and giving birth to O.C. on the banks of the Columbia River, Elizabeth died in childbirth.
And he got remarried, right?
A couple times.
Okay.
And various things happen with those relationships. He ends up in near Oakland. One of the sons settles a town called Fruitvale near Oakland and prospers in the orchard business. He after an odd adventure where he went to Honduras because he heard about the great soil, Henderson Lewelling at age of his 71,
this guy was just chasing the good soil.
He was. he was like so many adventurous, dynamic males at the time who were fascinated by the expanse of the West. He wrote about California and Oregon and ways west to the Orient. He'd read about Lewis and Clark. There were reports coming back of the great explorers on the Colorado River and the Western Mountains. This just excited a guy like Henderson Lewelling. I don't know how much it excited Elizabeth, but she, after all, was the woman in the group, and Henderson called the shots.
Now let's go back on his wife passing. How long did he wait before he got remarried? 3 months?
I'd say it was less than a year.
Was that
maybe around a year's time?
Yeah,
it was fairly soon.
Was that common back then? Because you don't want to do that stuff today.
Actually, it was pretty common.
People to just remarry that fast.
Yes, particularly for men looking for a wife to take care of the children. And like you say, the large families. So a widower with, there would have been still about 4 fairly young children to be raised.
Yeah.
So.
And none of his children came back this way. They all scattered.
I believe that's correct.
Okay. Do you think Lewelling will have the same views when it came to slavery if he was not a Quaker?
That's hard to say because so much of it centered around his faith. And the attitude toward slavery evolved because of his faith and his community and the people he was involved in, including his father and his uncles, and I'm sure his mother too.
Part of the faith is that, and this is a very large part, everyone is born with God's inner light. And if you follow that, then you can't own each other or treat each other in the bonds of slavery.
And much of the abolition anti-slavery movement was all across the country, in New England and the Midwest and everywhere, led by the churches.
What Lewelling and everybody else, all the other abolitionists, what they did was against the law. They knew what they were doing. They were breaking the law. Why do you think they did what they did?
I
What
think
drove
it goes back to their faith, definitely. But even maybe more than that, how you feel about your common man and brothers, as you will, sisters, I should say it too. It's just something inside them. It is hard to describe, and it's hard to really, for us to speak today is sort of hard to. It was just, I think they, coming from, like Dave said, the hotbed of abolition, they were continuing that.
Yeah.
Well, I see parallels with what happened in my lifetime. When you think of how people responded with the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, the work of Dr. King, and thousands and thousands of people that joined in opposing injustice, fight for voting rights, the fight for housing, fair housing, the fight for fair education. They knew that was wrong. Whatever the law was, it was wrong. And I think there's something in the human spirit that said you have to do something about it. And there were people who rose up against it, and they did. They did in 1830 and 1840, and they did in 1950 and 1960. I see some commonality there.
Interesting. If we bring back Henderson Lewelling today, what do you think is going to be his reaction with America and the relationship we have with one another?
I think he'd be fascinated to go to the Hy-Vee and see the apples.
I don't know if he's going to be happy with that.
Growing fruit was his life. It was his love. When you look at the creativity that he, particularly his younger brother Seth, creating trees. They invented the Bing cherry. So I would say his first interest on the way west, some of the kids said, we don't know whether they were serious, but in their later writings said, no matter what happened, those trees got watered before the horses did.
Before
the children got watered. Well, so he was a driven and consumed man by his fascination with farming and trees. But I think in terms of what he would say about what's going on in today's world, he'd probably shake his head and be unhappy. I don't know.
You think he will be unhappy with the relationship we have in the country? Do you think he's going to look and be like, oh, wow, all the work I put in the Underground Railroad and abolition did not go in vain?
I think that's true. Yes, that's true. When he looks at race issues today compared to what they were then, I'd say he'd probably say there's been progress, but I can't imagine how he wouldn't also be displeased with the fact that we aren't farther along than we are.
That's what I was going to say, was the surprise that, we're still dealing with this, thinking that, we did that horrible Civil War, and the period after the Civil War when things were looking pretty good for civil rights, and now we're just sort of inching our way backwards.
What is your concern?
I guess I have a concern. It's trying to reach more people to come see us and places like this. We have 4 wonderful sites in Iowa that are part of the Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. And they all welcome visitors. And, of course, there are places all across the country. Cathy and I are disturbed when we visit great sites. We toured the Chickamauga battlefield in Georgia. Incredible Civil War battle. There was nobody there. Just us and the ranger. It's disturbing and you go down the road to the water park and it's full. Well, those parents need to get those kids on down there to learn about what happened at Chickamauga and in addition to going to the water park. Where it troubles us that a lot of people aren't understanding the significance of our own American history. That worries me. Our part is small here. It's important to us. We're retired. We're having fun. I get frustrated that I'm not doing enough because I'm not reaching enough people.
Do you think we might need to tell history a little bit different in order to capture people's attention?
If you can, the more firsthand access to history, the better. It's troubling that after COVID-19, we're worried that school trips and excursions and bus trips maybe on the ropes and less. They're very important. We have a wonderful time here every year when the wonderful teachers in the Waterloo School District load 90 students on 3 school buses and bring them down here for the day.
That's a lot.
They go through Cedar Rapids.
Yes, it's a lot.
They go through Cedar Rapids to the African American Heritage Museum. They come down here, squeeze in some ice cream and a bag lunch, and we somehow get them all through this museum on a walking tour around the town of Salem where they can see where the other sites were. That's time well spent. You go home from that and you know your day's been well spent. Mm-hmm. And those teachers are incredible. It's a headache for a teacher to go through that with the school board and the principal, to find the buses, coordinate the parents, collect the money, the long day. Those teachers are treasures. I wish there were more of them. They make sure their kids see firsthand what happened.
And the thing about the tour here, the visit here, is going under the kitchen floor into the hiding place. That experience seems to really stick with the children who come here. That's the part they remember.
The fact we're here is a treasure. The fact that this building has been preserved, it could have gone the way of many others. Volunteers in our little community have made sure it's here, oftentimes with limited resources, volunteer labor, people like me painting the porch, whatever it is, it's a treasure, and it's a joy to be involved in it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have people on the board who've been involved and active for over 20 years, in their 80s, still active. We also get a lot of visitors that have family ties to the town. On the wall over here behind us are documents that are Quaker wedding certificates, a record of 3 Quaker weddings, and you see all the signatures at the bottom. Those are the witnesses. Everybody attending the wedding would have been a witness and signed the document.
Well, just 2 weeks ago, we had a descendant of the Townsend family who came here, and she was amazed. She looked at that wedding certificate and found out that it was her great-great-grandmother, Sarah Townsend's wedding certificate. She was amazed to find it here and be able to see every person who attended that wedding. Oh, wow. That's kind of fun.
So those kinds of experiences kind of click with people, and it's fun to be a part of it.
Now, when he was here in Salem, he was the reason of the Quaker split, kind of.
That happened across the nation. In 1843, the Quaker faith had something of a pretty intense disagreement over their relationship with slavery. It seems that the entire Quaker faith opposed slavery, but not everybody wanted to get involved.
Oh, yeah.
The Fugitive Slave Act had some pretty stiff penalties if you were actively helping slaves, loss of property and fines. And some people say, we agree with you on slavery, but we don't want to get involved in that. And here in Salem, they actually split the church, built a new church, divided the burying ground, the cemetery right down the middle.
Oh, really?
Depending on which church, which faith, which meeting house you went to, is depending on where you're buried. That line still exists, and it can be seen.
There's about a 10-foot space in the old part of the cemetery where there are no markers. And that's the line that was drawn. And depending on how you felt about slavery, where you were then buried.
Oh, it was that deep.
Yes.
Well, in the minutes of the meetings show where Henderson Lewelling, Elizabeth, many others were ejected or removed from the faith because of their position on slavery. And that's when they formed their own, what they call the anti-slavery meeting house.
Did John Brown ever make this far?
No. The movement of slaves and to become freedom seekers here was usually from central and eastern Missouri northward. John Brown was helping the slaves leave Kansas and western Missouri following the Kansas-Nebraska Act called Bleeding Kansas. Mm-hmm. And so that route was different. It was from southwestern Iowa, Fremont County, northward towards Des Moines, a little north of Des Moines, Grinnell, east to Iowa City, and Quakers and others in Cedar County, Iowa, and then across the Mississippi. We're well south of that by a good 2 hours. John Brown, to our knowledge, was never in this vicinity.
Why is this house important? Why don't we just break it down and just build something else here? Why do we need to keep it?
I think this incredible 180-year-old structure and what happened here is in a vital link with our past that we never want to forget. And we want our children to understand. We can't predict the influences a young person has, but to come here and understand a little bit about what happened, it's almost impossible for us to really understand the horror of slavery. But if you spend some time thinking about it and come here and studying it, you're better off than if you don't. And having that foundation of understanding how people were treated, how this nation grew and evolved, how people were courageous, I think it speaks volumes of what children need to know. And as long as we can do it, we're going to do it.
And today, children are learning in front of a screen, a computer screen, and there's good things about that too. But the whole social media era that children are in, most of them, that's all they know. It concerns us, the type of information, well, I'm not sure you can call it that, but what they're reading and what they're seeing. And so the experience of coming to a house like this, speaking with adults, hearing the truth.
The visual.
The visual.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, the visual. And the hands-on of that. And hearing from their elders, because, of course, their teachers, their parents are here with them. We think that that's a lesson that needs to continue.
We have a large cast iron set of slave shackles.
Yeah, I saw that.
In the front room. And that would have been used to punish slaves or perhaps transport them when being sold or move them to another field. They're heavy, they're harsh, they're in the North Carolina heat, they would have been very hot. They're just cruel. And they existed, they're real, they're fact. And we just show them to the children. And when I watch their eyes to see that, they really can't fathom what this object is and how you would use that. So I don't know exactly how they process that, but it's important they know that it happened. We present it as it was done. Not all slaves were treated that way, but some were.
We had an interesting experience. I wasn't here for the tour, but I was for the original tour given to a 10-year-old boy named Wyatt. He came with his class. He insisted he bring his mother, grandmother, and his siblings here to the museum. And so they came. Like I said, Dave was here to give the tour, and he was able to thank Wyatt for bringing his family here to hear the story.
I let Wyatt run it. I said, Wyatt, tell him what happened. And a young man, really, he was struck by what happened, and he wanted his family to share that. That you can't measure. You can't measure the value in that for that young man and his family.
Yeah,
his mom and his grandparents, two grandmothers, and his siblings.
That's incredible. Do the people here understand what this place meant in 19th century?
We have a fair share number of people who only know it as the old stone house down the street. That's all they know. Okay. There were also many others who savor the history and love it as much as we do. So you had that mix.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
and growing up here, attending school here, it's always been a tradition for the elementary school here in Salem to bring students to this museum every year and have a tour of it. I generally think it's the older generations who have a much better knowledge of what this home means.
What's the responsibility there of the older generation to pass down to the younger, though? That's when the history usually disappears.
I think it's an intense responsibility, particularly with the incredible influences that young people have today with social media and all those sources. History is so vital to what they must learn, and we have to get it right, and it has to be stated as fact. And that's what we try to do. We work hard with the 7 points of interest, we call them, when you come here, to help convey what we know about the history of slavery and the incredible courage of the abolitionists who opposed it. And our job is to get it right. And then our other job is to try and get as many listeners here as we can to take a few moments to reflect on that history.
Yeah, we welcome school groups to come and get the full tour, hear the story. The other thing is that the state of Iowa has placed civil rights and the Underground Railroad as part of that, teaching curriculum for history in 5th grade.
Oh, okay.
And so we've tried to focus on that.
Okay. What lesson can we learn from Henderson Lewelling?
I think he was so many things to a lot of people. He's somebody I sure would like to meet.
What would you talk to him about if you get that opportunity?
If I had we have this picture of him hanging over a mantelpiece in the room next to you. It's an interesting, it was an early photograph. He's bearded. He has kind of almost a sly smile on his face. I think he was a very clever man. We're finding right now that there are crinoids, prehistoric sea urchins in the stonework out here. And it almost looks like he put them certain places. That's the work of a clever man building a home. I think I would certainly want to talk to him about his perspective on abolition and why he was very intense in his opposition to slavery. We know that. He and Joel Garretson and some others actually got involved in another political party in the 1840s called the Liberty Party. Liberty Party didn't think that Abraham Lincoln was doing enough about opposing slavery. There's no doubt about they were very strong-willed. I would want to talk to him about that. I'd also like to ask him how he grasps these trees, because I've tried it and it hasn't worked. I've tried it, and I don't know how you'll make a living, because the ones I've done don't work. They die. Yep. These guys somehow masterfully figured this out in a pretty harsh climate.
I have a slightly different take on Henderson Lewelling. Obviously, a man to admire for his intelligence, cleverness, and all that he did for the abolition movement. But I also think of it from a perspective of Elizabeth. Now, maybe he was a man of the times, so maybe things have changed a little bit in that regard, but he was certainly strong-headed. Elizabeth did go. She felt to be a strong enough woman to be able to persevere, but he was somebody kind of hard to deal with. So I would love to have a visit with Elizabeth.
What would you talk to about?
Raising a family, what was that like? Making those moves, what was that like? And how you did it, I think is the main thing. Yeah. So I think today, we have our modern conveniences. How in the world did they do it?
How did you keep everybody quiet when a bounty hunter knocked on your door?
Especially the kids.
Yeah. The kids were, the children knew this was serious business.
Yeah.
And at that time, children actually were seen and not heard. Children have changed over the years.
Yeah.
But we believe that the children likely were pretty, they understood how serious this was and followed whatever lead their parents gave them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was, at that time, we talked about the services of the meeting house were mostly just periods of silence. Actual Bible study, learning to read the Bible and all of that was all done in the home. And it fell on the mother. That was her responsibility to do that on top of everything else.
Yeah. And he ended up in California. That was the final spot for him.
He was burning brush at one of his son's properties. The record shows something happened, heart attack, whatever, we don't know, but he fell into the fire and died. The report in the local newspaper said that he was severely roasted.
Ooh.
What a way to go, huh?
Yeah. Oh, boy.
It's an amazing tale, to me, an American tale of a family that began in Wales 300 years earlier, 250 years earlier, seeking religious freedom, coming to Pennsylvania, moving to North Carolina, Indiana, Iowa, California, Honduras, and back.
Yeah.
And being severely roasted.
Well, anything else you guys want to add to Henderson Lewelling? I'm leaving out.
Well, we were excited to be having launched an incredibly cool new website, www.lewelling.org, LEWELLING.org. And if folks check that out, they will get an overview of what we have talked about. We'll also find what happens when they come here on a tour. People want to know, well, how long will it take? What happens? We have what we call 7 points of interest. This is a visit, not in a museum where you look at a bunch of old stuff. We want an experience here. We want a discussion. And we have 7 points of interest to share with people, and each of those talks about a different topic, either in the early settlement of Iowa, the Underground Railroad, or the remarkable tree story.
Can you go through those quick?
Yes, the first stop is outside. to look at the magnificence of the construction of this home and to envision it in 1840 when there was woodland, prairie land, tall prairie grass, and the first settlers arrived. The second one is in the living room behind you, where we give something of the Lewelling family history all the way back to Wales and their movement here, and talk about some of the early settlers here, including people like Walter Schreiner, who lived to be 107, was a young lad here before the Civil War, and what he wrote down, we take to the bank because he saw it firsthand. We talk about a young conductor named Nathan Kellum and his wife, Rachel. Rachel, as soon as the Civil War ended, started writing prolifically about what she had seen, what she had witnessed. It's pretty sound writing, and we take that to the bank. And we then move into the kitchen where Cathy and some of our other docents let people experience what it is to crawl into that concealed place and understand what folks did to help harbor short-term. You're only under that for as long as needed till the bad guys clear. We then move into the room we're in now, where we talk about some of the some aspects of pioneer life, a couple of the other safe houses that were in Salem, the Beehive, the Gibson House, and others. The very historic little sewing machine to your right, the little room next to you where we know slaves were hidden. Talk about the door behind you, which leads to a very narrow stairwell to the basement and what happened there. We then move into Justice Gibbs's office, where you hear the complete story of the Roald Dahl slave case. And then we head upstairs. That's stop number 6, where you learn about the 2 bedrooms and the sleeping accommodations and some of the early clothing and Whittier College. There's a lot upstairs to discuss. Mm-hmm. As long as we're holding people's attention, we're there quite a while. we start to look in their eyes and see if they're checking their watches and their phones and seeing if it's time to leave. But if they're still interested, we could go on for quite a while up there. And then stop 7 is back to where you started, and they're in the living room where we discuss the remarkable story of Henderson Lewelling as the nurseryman in the trip to Oregon. And those are basically the 7 points of interest.
This whole thing gets supported by volunteer, right?
Totally. Not a soul on the payroll for 60 years, all volunteer. We do not charge an admission. When we meet people on stop number 2 in the front room, we say, we do welcome donations, but we don't want you to donate until after you've had your tour, and the amount of your donation will reflect the quality of our tour. We've been doing pretty good. We also have a partnership program where people who donate $20 or more annually, they then are automatic subscribers to our twice annual history newsletter. And that's a good way to keep in touch with them. That partnership is very important to us.
Talk about the newsletter. Are these online? You publish this online? Or
no, they're not.
Get sent? Okay.
We're not. And we're sort of old school on this, but when we mail that to our supporters, a half-page piece of paper falls out in their lap. We want to make sure they see it. And that's their donation form. I know folks say, well, if you do it online, it's easier. All you do is put in your credit card. Okay, we'll do that too. Our partners are generally older folks like us, and they kind of like to take a document and hold it in their hands and read it and keep it. So we still do it that way. It takes some work, but it's useful.
Okay. And how often this newsletter comes out?
January and July.
Okay. And you guys write these yourself?
We're not the only writers, but I guess you could say I'm the editor.
Okay. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate your time, and I know you could be doing all other fun things today, but you just decided to sit down and talk to me about Henderson Lewelling. I appreciate that.
Well, we appreciate your work, and this is great. And the other interviews you've been doing really tell an important story, so thank you.
I appreciate that. Well, that was Dave and Cathy Helman from the Lewelling Quaker Museum in Salem, Iowa. Check out their website, man, www.lewelling.org. Thank you for listening to the Iowa Civil Rights History Podcast. Until next time, be safe.